Welcome to Author Life Podcast, where myself and guest authors share their stories, offer tips and advice, and share our writing, publishing, and marketing knowledge. I'm your host, Delcherie Gladden. Welcome everyone back to Author Life Podcast this week. I have a new guest on the show, and she's going to be talking about some of her work, her newest book, and just her publishing journey and life story a little bit and how that's influenced it. So I'm going to turn the time over to Avanti Centrae. Go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone.
Hey, thanks, Delcherie. It's a real thrill to be here. And I have been writing thrillers for the last couple of years. They're sort of smart thrillers, Da Vinci Code meets Tomb Raider, or, with a little bit of Mission Impossible thrown in there, maybe a little Handmaid's Tale in the current one. So I write, fun books for smart people that really love to read and are looking for that memorable book. And I've been honored to have won a number of literary awards. I'm also excited that my work's been compared to people like James Rollins, Steve Berry, Dan Brown, Clive Cussler. So that's sort of the genre that I'm writing in. And I really appreciate being here on your show.
Awesome. Well, I am glad to have you. How many books do you have previous to this one that's about to come out next month, right?
Yeah, so Cleopatra's Vendetta comes out November 15th. And prior to that, I wrote 3 books in the Van Ops thriller series. And I may or may not write a 4th Van Ops book. And for now, Cleopatra's Vendetta is a standalone, but we'll see. Tim and Angie Stryker are the 2 main protagonists there. So we'll see how people respond to this one and whether or not it warrants a follow-on book. But yeah, three books already published.
Awesome. So tell me about a little bit about the Van Ops series before we dive into Cleopatra's Vendetta.
Yeah, so the Van Ops series, Van Ops stands for Vanguard Operations, and it's a fun set of books designed around Van Ops as a fictional alphabet soup kind of organization similar to the CIA or the FBI. But in my world, this organization came out of the ashes of the CIA in the 70s, when the CIA was truly doing things like experimenting on remote viewing, which is trying to get spies to go out of their body to see what other people around the world are doing. They were trying to kill people remotely. So they were involved in all of these parapsychology experiments, and in my fictional world, they got in trouble for doing all of that, and so their work had to go underground. So Van Ops is dedicated to obscure threats. And in the first novel, The Lost Power, Maddie Marshall and her twin brother Will are in their early 30s, kind of living a normal pedestrian life. She's an app designer in San Francisco, and he's somewhat estranged from her. They've been fighting since high school. He's living down in Brazil. He's an engineer. It's when their father calls them both to their Napa Valley vineyard to talk about something, neither of them know what. And when they show up on a foggy morning, a sniper shoots their father and Will's wife. And the adventure starts from there, because with his dying breath, he tells them to go to an attorney in Sacramento and get some stuff that he's left for them there. And on the way to the attorney, they're chased by the same sniper that killed their father and Will's wife. And basically, the letter that their father left them sends them on a quest to find Alexander the Great's mysterious Egyptian weapon that has been known about in their royal Spanish family for thousands of years. So it's got a little bit of that, Tomb Raider, Indiana Jones kind of vibe, along with some Da Vinci Code. Let's solve some clues to find the puzzle. But it's smarter than both of those. It's got some themes of violence versus nonviolence. Maddie Marshall is an Aikido expert, and Aikido is all about nonviolence. So I thought it would be kind of neat to put somebody like that in a position of being chased by Russian snipers to see what she would do, in sort of a kill or be killed kind of situation. So my work delves with kind of tougher themes under the guise of, fun quests.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like that style continues in your newer book, still dealing with some difficult themes, but incorporating history and adventure as well. So tell us a little bit more about your new book.
Yeah, so Cleopatra's Vendetta is kind of special. I really enjoyed all the research with Cleopatra. And so she's, so it's called Cleopatra's Vendetta because the idea that I had for this book was that she had quite a bit of time, a number of months between the time she and Mark Antony were defeated at a naval battle and the time that Octavian invaded Egypt. So she had months and months and months to plan for the invasion that she knew was coming. Left some treasure behind. And what if that treasure is a little bit more meaningful than just gold, silver, and the like? And people may or may not know that a big part of why Cleopatra lost that battle is because Octavian, her mortal enemy, used early forms of propaganda to make her and Mark Antony look bad. Octavian used leaflets and flyers, posters, and the like to make her out as a whore, a harlot, and made Mark Antony look bad for hanging out with her. And so Octavian was able to get a much larger army and navy, and that's a contributing factor to how the lovers Cleopatra and Mark Antony lost their war. And so my thought was, well, maybe Octavian heads up an organization that's dedicated to defeating people like Cleopatra. And what if that organization still existed today? And what kind of horrible things would they be up to? And so I figured they would be up to things like sex trafficking. So in present time, so we have a prologue with Cleopatra. We get a little bit of a feel for her and her time. The bulk of the story takes place in present day. And we've got Tim and Angie Stryker, who are cool power couple. She is the CEO of like a biofuels engineering company, trying to help the world with some, algae fuel and the like. And he works for the Futures Command out of an Army base. He's got a special ops background, and he and his team of misfits deal with sort of futuristic threats. And Angie's just kind of doing her CEO deal. Well, they lost a baby about a year before the story begins. And since that time, the Strykers have not been seeing eye to eye at all. She's been turning to the bottle to deal with her grief, and he doesn't like that at all because his father was an alcoholic and killed his mother in a drunken rage. What happens is they go on a vacation. They're like, hey, let's try to go on a holiday. And they have some friends that are getting married in Bari, Italy. And along with Angie's sister, who works for Tim Stryker, they all go to Bari. And they're having a good time, but Tim and his buddy Ray get pulled to Saudi Arabia. There's a number of high-profile assassinations that have been happening for months, and nobody knows why. And so Tim Stryker and his team are assigned to stop what they think is the latest assassination of a prince in Saudi Arabia. So they go there, and while they're there, failing to stop the latest assassination, Angie and their 4-year-old daughter are kidnapped. They had gone to a bar after lunch and didn't notice the roofies that were put in their drinks. And so they get kidnapped. And it turns out that they're the same folks that are assassinating all of these world leaders. And so Tim is just desperate to save his family. So we have a little bit of a Taken vibe there where, the guy has to go save his family. So in order to do that, he learns that Cleopatra's journal that she left before she died contains the location of this same cult that she's been fighting during her lifetime. And so in order to find his family and stop the next assassination attempt on a high-ranking U.S. official, Timothy has to try to track down a 2,000-year-old journal. So it is a lot of fun. There's a lot of action, but again, it does deal with some tough topics. Sex trafficking being one of them. It's been getting a lot of rave reviews. I'm just thrilled by how people are responding to it. The guys seem to really like all the action, and the women seem to really like the messaging. So it's got something for everybody.
That's great. And just reading a little bit about your bio and where you come from, the interest in military operations, I'm guessing, came from growing up in a military community.
Well, my dad, he was in the Marines. I was not a military brat. He left the Marines before I was around, but it was part of my growing up. I remember seeing all the pictures of him and his, hat and Marine uniform, and it put a big stamp on him. He was in the service for a number of years in military intelligence, and he liked all of the James Bond movies, and and I think a lot of like the Clive Cussler books, and so I definitely got my love for adventure and the military from him. And my mom likes antiques and not so much history, but I think, it's not a far stretch for me to look at the antiques that she was always interested in and to think about the stories behind them, right? Where did that cool painting come from, or that dresser, who had it, what was going on at the time. And the geopolitical stuff fascinates me. And so the adage that history will repeat itself, I think if you pay attention and look at the big picture, you can see some of those things going on. So yeah, definitely my family influenced my writing in a couple of big ways.
That's really neat. And I think it's hard to not be influenced by how you grow up and those important people in your life. And I think that's great that you were able to incorporate a lot of that into what you're doing now. And I did want to ask, Cleopatra, it's a well-known, historical figure, but I don't know how many people really know a lot of the details of her life and maybe what to really expect coming into this book. So tell me about some of the research you did and why you went with Cleopatra.
Yeah, I wanted a powerful woman, and it doesn't get much better than Cleopatra. And so I'm an outliner, and I was outlining the book, and I was thinking about, Tim and Angie's story. Ops books typically revolve around a historical figure, and I really like using the historical figure as a hook, as a way to bring readers in. And Cleopatra has an amazing reputation, right? Pretty much everybody on the planet knows who she is. But like a lot of people, like you, when I had the idea of, oh, maybe I can tie Cleopatra into this story, I didn't know a lot of the details about her either. So I bought a number of biographies and really enjoyed reading them. Stacy Schiff's Life about Cleopatra, it was a bestseller when it was released, and for good reason. She really did her research and brought to life Cleopatra's entire short life, from growing up in the royal household to her father dealing with Julius Caesar and Cleopatra needing to confront Julius at, a fairly young age. And then, just how politically savvy she was. There's a lot that we hear about her beauty. And I think, the movie that Elizabeth Taylor made may have been focused on just how beautiful she was and how she seduced these two powerful Romans. But there's so much more to her than that. And I think she was smart. She spoke 9 languages.
Oh, wow.
Think about that. She was 9 languages. I took French in high school and can kind of fumble through Spanish, but she spoke 9 languages. She ruled the country, which at the time was probably the wealthiest country on the planet because of its agriculture. They had harnessed the ability to grow using the Nile. And she was the leader of their military. She had coins minted in her image. Alexandria was very advanced for the time. It had coin-operated vending years before the birth of Christ, and they had like automatic treadmill type things, coin-operated vending machines. So they were like the New York of the day. Her city. And Rome, where her 2 lovers were from, was like a Wild West backwater that didn't even have paved streets, right? So a couple of the things that Julius Caesar brought from Egypt, the calendar. So the calendar that we still use today with the 12 months and the leap year, that came from the Egyptians. And the Roman calendar was weeks and or months out of sync. So Julius Caesar brought this calendar back over to Rome and named one of the months, after himself, for doing that. But there were a lot of those kinds of technological innovations that, they brought over to Rome. At the time, Rome was also not very what we would consider advanced in the way of like women's rights. So Romans were allowed to kill their second daughters Egyptians, on the other hand, women owned property and businesses. And so, I can imagine the culture shock that Cleopatra felt when she visited Rome, because there it was sort of women are barefoot and pregnant kind of thing, and here she's the leader of the wealthiest country on earth. So it was a real culture shock, and that ties into the book, this culture war of women's rights, kind of where women have been socially throughout the last couple thousand years. So that's why I wanted a powerful woman and chose Cleopatra.
Good choice. She's a fascinating person, and yeah, a lot of that I wasn't aware of, so I think that'd be really interesting to learn more about and see how you wove the two together, the modern issues and what she was experiencing during her lifetime. And you brought up earlier, and I wanted to ask you a little bit more about it, but that idea of using propaganda, and that was also a very early instance of that being used, and it's still very effective today, maybe even more effective with social media and how easy it is to get messages out to people. But yeah, tell me a little bit more about how that theme is used both in the time of Cleopatra and then if it's used in the present day part of the story as well.
Yeah, that's a great question, because that's another thread that runs through the story. And, as we talked a little bit about earlier, propaganda had been used enough, even in 30 BC at Cleopatra's time, that her nemesis was able to create pamphlets and leaflets and posters to, in an attempt to make her look bad. And one of the characters in the novel, a side character named Jane, is a psyops expert. So psyops meaning psychological operations. And so she has a conversation with Ray. They've got this sort of instant attraction and this hot steamy thing going on, and so they're having a conversation over a meal after an assassination attempt in India, where they're meeting for the first time, and he's asking her about psychological operations and the history of propaganda. And she tells him that propaganda had started maybe about 500 years before Cleopatra, some of the first known recorded instances of it. And he says, well, when was it really militarized? And, you can think about it being militarized in Cleopatra's time, but if you fast forward to more modern times, it was used pretty heavily in World War I and World War II. The Allies would drop leaflets from bombers over Germany, and the United States has used it in places like Vietnam and in some of the wars. Allies and our enemies use it as well. I am of the philosophy that Russia has been using it pretty successfully against us and other Western countries, particularly in our elections, since at least 2016, if not significantly earlier. And in the book, we've got the cult called the Sons of Adam is using a lot of the same techniques that the Russians are, where they're creating artificial intelligence personas who do everything from answer questions on online answer.com to even writing their own journal articles. And this is all based in facts, things that are happening today. I check out the news on Twitter once in a while, and just last week was looking at some articles about how far artificial intelligence has come and how these personas are being used even to spin up entire fake companies. They gave an example of an About Us page with a company where all of the personas were AI. They were not real at all. And they had developed full-on LinkedIn profiles, full-on social media profiles for these fake people. And I'm forever logging into Twitter and seeing, the video that showed Jill Biden saying blah, blah, blah was digitally altered. So our technology that we have today is very much a blessing and a curse. In the story, the bad guys they're ginning up a deep fake video that they're trying to make super real so that the president-elect will be completely discredited and embarrassed by this false video that they've created using their high-tech deepfake technology. And all that stuff is available. It's here. in the back of all of my books, I separate fact from fiction and what was real and not real. The good news is that the technology to detect deepfakes is also evolving, but it's often like just a step behind, you know. So that's why people are seeing those posts that this video is not true. It was taken out of context, or it was clipped, or it's not accurate. And so I think I've got a quote in the back from a early Greek philosopher that man's most judicious sense is figuring out what to not believe. There's so much that's thrown at us all every day that's intentionally misleading. There's very powerful players that want us to believe things that are just not true. And so I think it's up to each of us to check our sources and try to discern if the information that's being thrown at us is accurate, or if it's coming from some bad actor out there.
Yeah, and it can be definitely, just as a regular person, difficult to tell the difference between those. And I do think it's nice that there's more of an effort and more of a focus on helping people figure that out and discrediting some of these things that come up that are purely propaganda. And that kind of leads into the next question I wanted to ask you about. With the sex trafficking being a theme, I think it's something that for a long time just kind of was under the radar of the general public in how often it happens, and the fact that it goes on everywhere, not just in other countries, or when you travel abroad and things, that it happens right in your own towns a lot of the time. And I've noticed the last couple of times that I've flown that there are a lot more posters and things playing, and just different things up in the airport asking people to be more aware, to look for things. If you see something that seems questionable, say something to someone, and making that effort to make the public more aware that it's going on. So tell me how you researched that, for one, to get some of the information on that, and how you incorporated it into the story.
Yeah, so this was a tricky subject to put in a book. I like my books to be fun. And for listeners out there, I just want people to know that there's nothing graphic that happens on screen. We do have a kidnapping, but there's no graphic, sexual exploitation, or no graphic rape scenes or anything like that. It is subject matter, but it's not graphic. So, I've had a number of people curious about that because they've got triggers about it. And that tells me, like you mentioned, that this is just hugely pervasive in our culture. And it's not just sex trafficking, it's rape too. And it's something that every woman has grown up with, that threat, I think, from the time that we're little. We're told to be wary of strangers. And when we're really little, our parents don't really tell us why. But as women grow into their teenage years, it becomes apparent that there's, a lot of people out there that would like to exploit women for their bodies. And, I too am seeing a lot of those posters, and I'm really glad that that awareness is growing. Part of why I chose Bari, Italy for the location where this kidnapping happens is because I had the opportunity to travel to Bari at one point and was disturbed by the number of catcalls as a young woman traveling with another young woman. It was a shockingly obscene objectification of both of us. Just a lot of "hey baby" and Italian. And it's one thing to be, admired and appreciated. It's another to be objectified, right? And I didn't feel safe in that town. So, I researched how it can happen, and we've all heard of date rape drugs. So I researched the effect of roofies and what that would be like, the paralyzing effect of the drug, and, what that would feel like. Again, it was a little bit tricky. And I also learned that it doesn't just happen with women, right? So there are young men who are trafficked both for sex and for their work, right? Trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar business. and it's basically modern day slavery. There's people that are either talked into it or that are outright kidnapped, and then once they're in that world, they have a really hard time getting out. At our suburban shopping mall in Sacramento, which is the nearest large city that I live next to, we've heard stories about other young women trying to lure unsuspecting young women, like into the restroom and then into a van. So it is happening, not just with roofies in foreign countries, but it's happening to young women and to some extent young men all over the world. So it's I hope I can raise a little bit of awareness about it, and hope that people will travel in pairs and maybe take a self-defense class. And there's also things that people can do with having GPS jewelry, for instance, or I have a watch that should something happen to me, if I'm with my phone, I can request assistance by pushing a button on my watch. So there's things that people can do proactively to mitigate the threat. I don't want people to not enjoy traveling or not enjoy going to the mall, but I think that we all need to be aware that there are people in the world who, for whatever reasons, do bad things. And there's things that we can all do to protect ourselves against those.
Mm-hmm. That's a good message to have. And, I have had those moments myself, and I have a young daughter that, you think about those things a lot. And I think having that greater awareness is a really good thing. And it kind of brings us back around. You mentioned Cleopatra, her shock of traveling to Rome and seeing the difference between her society and how they treated women and the level of inclusion and respect there. And it's still an issue, especially with some of the recent political things that have been going on. It's a topic that you would think we'd be further along on, but we're not. So I'm interested to see how that theme plays out in both the historical aspect and the present aspect of the book.
Yeah, I think it is incredibly timely. I'm looking at what's happening in Iran right now, which is about not just about women's rights, but about equal rights. And I think that with a book, you kind of have to pick something to focus in on. And so even though it's got a theme of women's rights, personally, I'm all about, equal rights for everybody. Pick your sexual preference, pick your skin tone. Why can't we just all get along, right? And so I'm happy to see in Iran that their fight is against a very repressive regime that is, and I think we see that too in cultures where women are not included. We see other marginalized society that is not included too. And I hope that men recognize that when women are empowered, that they're empowered as well. And when LGBT people are not empowered, when minorities are not empowered, it hurts the entire society. And I'm watching what's going on in Iran with bated breath, hoping that regime is overthrown. And in the book Cleopatra's Vendetta, the prince that's killed in Saudi Arabia, women in their burqas, and I'm going to mispronounce hijab, they're out in the streets protesting because this prince that was killed was he was a defender. He was trying to make the Saudi kingdom more inclusive. And so they're out protesting in the streets. And in the book, the protests don't turn as violent, but they're out there in the streets, just like they are in Iran, today, as we're speaking to one another. And, women have been in the streets recently in the United States protesting some of the things that have been happening. And women still don't have equal pay. Even in countries like the United States, there's still about a 17% pay gap on average between men and women. And when you see cultures where everyone is valued, the entire culture benefits. And so this Roman ideal of women, being barefoot and pregnant, it doesn't serve anybody. There's been a lot of talk about toxic masculinity and been with the men who've served in the military. And some of that toxic masculinity shows up in how we treat our military veterans. We talk these young men into going to war, and then we don't treat them well afterwards. And the men don't have a way to deal with their PTSD. Ray, one of the characters in Cleopatra's Vendetta, has PTSD. He's got, he had some stuff that went down during his service, and he's still wanting to contribute. So he's found a home in the Futures Command with, under Tim Stryker. But there's a lot of, particularly men, because culturally they're not, allowed to show their feelings. And when you get that kind of toxicity, it shows up in all kinds of ways in our culture. I think that a lot of the mass shootings are because we don't have a way to collectively as a culture deal with our emotions. We're taught how to read and write, but we're not taught how to deal with anger or frustration. And then you add in readily available weapons into that mix, and you end up with a toxic stew of, a mass shooting every other day in this country. So I think it kind of goes back to a couple of core things, equal rights for everybody, and helping people to process and deal with their challenges. And the first couple books in particularly The Lost Power deals with Maddie having to go through some of her own emotional challenges, things that she's been afraid of her entire life she has to deal with in order to go on this quest. So those are a couple of things that I'm kind of passionate about that come through in my work.
That's great. I admire that you can bring in so many heavy topics, but still, from what it sounds like in checking it out, keep an element of that fun adventure in there as well. And
that's my goal.
How do you
at the end of
balance
the day,
that out?
We're entertaining, right?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I consider myself an entertainer, right? It needs to be a page turning, oh my God, what happens next? My readers, I really want them to connect with the characters. So my characters are a little bit flawed, right? Like in Cleopatra's Vendetta, Angie's struggling with a drinking problem and Stryker's mad at her, and that's real. And I think it helps people relate to them. And so as they go through their struggles, and I think a lot of good literature does this, just maybe, not quite so consciously, as writers, we're taught about the wound, the character's wound, and why that's important. I try to take a real light touch with some of those deeper topics. And then if people want to, explore them further, they can do that in other ways. So I'm really just kind of scratching the surface. These are fun action adventure novels. They're not deep drama type of stories, but it's a challenge to write a smart thriller. There's a lot of thrillers out there that are simply fun, and to me they're a little fluffy. I like to, when I read something, I really like to read something that's got a little bit of meaning behind it. Not a lot, not deep dark kind of stuff, but enough to make me think a little bit. And so I like to return that same favor for my own readers.
And you mentioned that you are an outliner. So I'm guessing you do a lot of your research in advance before you start putting down chapters.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And with each of my books, I've written some, not like 30 million pages or 30,000 words like I've heard some other authors do, but I end up with like a 10 or 15 page outline where each chapter has the location, the point of view, and to me, all of the major plot points I like to have, so that I'm hitting, something great at the midpoint. Other writers will know what I'm talking about, with the plot points, at like a fourth way in and 3/4 of the way in. There's certain beats that you want to have. So I make sure all that's there, and especially twists. I love a good twist, and I like to have more than one twist in my stories, and I like to have red herrings in there too. I like people to be guessing, what's going to happen and what's really going on here, and what did Cleopatra hide that could have such an impact on modern society that everybody's trying to find it. And in order to do that successfully, I don't get to the end of a book and go, oh, it's a twist. You have to set those. You got to, especially a great twist, you've got to set it up all along the way. Agatha Christie did a great job with that. The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, for instance, was one of the first novels where it's sort of a silent patient type of unreliable narrator kind of story. And you got to set that kind of thing up, at the very beginning. Where you're led to believe something, you're not you're not outright lying to the reader, but you're using sleight of hand, and you're using the things that you choose to say and not say to, have a perception of something that's happening. The third book in my Van Op series, The Doomsday Medallion, it's got a monster twist in it. I've just found that by outlining, I'm able to set up those kinds of twists a lot better. And as part of that, I also get in touch with my characters. I use some psychological profiling from a book called The Enneagram to lay out my characters' personalities so that I know how they would react in the novel.
It's neat. I know a lot of authors have very particular ways of building their characters, and some will use, like the profile sheets and fill out all their details. But yeah, I haven't come across someone who uses the Enneagrams. So that's really cool. It's something that I've seen come up more and more lately, just for whatever reason. But I haven't dug into it too much yet. It's something that I'm like, I should put some time and look into that and see what it's all about. So that's really cool that you use it for
absolutely.
Characters.
Yeah, somebody told me about the Enneagram in my 20s, and this was before I was thinking about being a writer, but I was just told about it as kind of a personal growth tool. And it's been one of those books that has completely changed my life, because I was able to not only understand myself and my own motivations, but all the people close to me. And I've used it in my various jobs, and now I'm using it, as a writer. And it's based on an ancient Sufi teaching that there are 9 different personality points, and people can go kind of from one to the other when they're stressed or when they're happy. And I'm able now to, once I get to know somebody, I'm able to pretty quickly kind of figure out which of those 9 types they fall into. And it's all about what people are resisting. So it was psychology from 2,000 years ago. So it's like, what deep, dark thing you're resisting makes you do double homework so that you're hiding that wound, right? And so there's ways that shows up. So like somebody who's got a huge fear of failure will show up as being hugely successful. They're the kind of people that need the Mercedes and the McMansions and the making $1 million a year. And it all stems from their deep-seated fear of failure. Somebody who doesn't want to be embarrassed goes to great lengths to be perfect about everything. So it's a wonderful, wonderful tool, because I don't have to go into all that great and gory detail in describing my characters, because I know if so-and-so is, this on the Enneagram, if they're a 7 on the Enneagram, they're a Peter Pan kind of personality, right? They're the jack of all trades. They're always having a good time. They've always got a joke and a smile. And there's these things that are common among all of that type on the Enneagram. And so it rings true for a reader. They're like, oh yeah, that guy, Matt, I've got one of those at work. He's always cracking up, but he's insecure. So it's been a fantastic tool. Highly recommend it.
Oh, that's really cool. I will definitely check that out and see how to make use of that a little bit more, because that's really interesting to be able to do that. And speaking of things that you've come across that have helped you in your writing, I read in your bio that writing was not your first profession, that you were in computer and information technology in that realm. And have you ever considered using that setting or using some of those parts of your life in any of your writing?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. My degree is in computer information technology from Purdue, and I've got about 20 years in the IT field. And each of my books, so my tagline is intrigue, history, science, and mystery, wrapped up in nonstop action thrillers. And the science part can either be, like some sort of nuclear secret, or it can be the technology aspect of computers. And Maddie, the protagonist in the Van Op series, she was an app designer. And as she progresses in her covert ops training, she gets some hacking skills. So that plays out in there. And in Cleopatra's Vendetta, the deep fake technology is very much an IT, artificial intelligence kind of threat. So it's usually the threats that relate back. That definitely, that background definitely, finds its way into my books here and there.
That's cool. And there's probably certain things that are pet peeves for you, having been in that industry, and how they're not necessarily portrayed accurately in a lot of fiction or TV. Do you have any of those?
I don't know about pet peeves. I think that most writing in movies, I think we all take a few liberties here and there. So none of that really bugs me. But it is fun when I do find another author that can portray things accurately. Or in Solstice Shadows, the second book in the Van Op series, that has very much a technological threat, and it's talking about all of the everyday devices that can be easily hacked. So yeah, I wouldn't say that I've really got a pet peeve about it, but it is neat when I see other authors that are able to bring that level of research to bear.
It's cool. I'm glad it doesn't keep you from enjoying other media. I definitely know people like that don't want to read or watch things in their personal field of experience because it drives them too crazy to see things not done accurately. Get in there and show that they put in that work. I think that's always appreciated. So what do you have in the future? What are you working on now, aside from preparing for the release of your new book?
Yeah, so it's a lot of work preparing for the release of a new book. So my creative hat has been put to the side. There's a book that I started working on earlier this year that I'm not sure if I'm going to finish it. I don't know if other writers out there kind of do the same thing where you start working on something. This is one that, from a marketing standpoint, I want to continue either of the series, right? I read the next one. So from a marketing standpoint, that's what I should be working on. But the story that's kind of come to me is a domestic heist novel that I've got about halfway written. So I'm not sure if I want to finish that off, because it might almost even involve creating a whole different pen name, which is a lot of work because it's really completely outside my branding. Or what I might do is try to find a way to bring in maybe a historical figure into the heist novel so that at least it's got some familiarity for my own readers. So I'm kind of trying to figure out how that one might play. And I do have some ideas for another Van Ops novel that I'm kind of tossing around up there. Once Cleopatra gets, born into the world, I think there will be more mental space for figuring out where I want to go next.
Good. Well, sounds interesting either way. Your domestic heist novel and both your series that you already have. So I'm sure whatever direction you take, you'll have fun with it and your readers will be pleased. And I won't offer any advice on that because I'm terrible about staying in my genre and brand, and I just write whatever and go with it.
I saw that. Is that working for you, or do you find marketing challenges with that? How does that working for you?
There's definitely marketing challenges, but I think most of my reader base knows I'm a pretty eclectic writer, and I don't expect them to read everything I put out. So if it's not their thing, cool. It'll be somebody else's thing.
There you go.
So yeah, I teach marketing classes and stuff like that, but I clearly don't always follow my own advice, but we all make our own path.
You just got to listen to the muse,
Yep, that's how I go.
Yeah,
but we are just about out of time, but I wanted to give you a chance to let people know where they can find you, when and where they can find the book next month, and just, how people can reach out and connect with you.
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. So Cleopatra's Vendetta will be available wherever books are sold. If the librarian or your local bookstore doesn't have it yet, you can always ask them to order it. If you like it in audio or ebook, you can find it pretty much everywhere on, of course, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Google Play, Apple, all the major online retailers. And right now, all my books are on all the online retailers as well as some various libraries and bookstores too. People can go to vanops.net. That's a lot easier to remember than avanticentrae.com. Vanops.net refers to avanticentrae.com, where people can get links to all of those various retailers. They can check out trailers. I've done a number of really cool trailers, which are a lot of fun, kind of give you the visual sense of what the books are about. And for people who like to try before they buy, for the small price of their email, they can get the first 6 chapters of The Lost Power. And by subscribing to my newsletter, they get all kinds of offers and deleted scenes and that sort of thing. And from my website, they can also get the links to my social media handles. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So vanops.net is kind of the hub where everybody can go and figure out, learn more.
Awesome. Well, yeah, please do check out the website. Keep an eye out for the book. It's November 15th, correct, that it comes out?
Yeah. Thank you, Delcherie.
Right.
It's been very much a pleasure.
It's been great talking to you, and good luck with your future projects, and love to have you back.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again for listening to Author Life Podcast. For more information on the podcast or guest authors, check out the links in the show description. If there's a topic you'd like to learn more about, find me online and send me suggestions anytime.